When I prepared the birthday cake for my son, my mother-in-law leaned forward, pursed her lips, and blew out the candles. All of them. My son's smile collapsed mid-sparkle. I froze, the knife still in my hand, halfway between frosting and flame. The room erupted with clapping, like she had done something delightful. Everyone except me. I stood there, with the sugar smell rising into my nose, and thought, she really did it. She really took that moment from him. I had spent the entire week on that cake. 3 layers of chocolate sponge, whipped cream, strawberries lined neatly on top. My piping was shaky, but I spelled his name across the center anyway. He had been counting down the days. Each morning before school he'd say, 7 candles, Mom. Don't forget 7. I didn't forget. I placed each candle myself, careful, making sure they stood straight. But apparently, my mother-in-law decided those candles were hers to own. What I didn't expect was how normal everyone else acted. Like this wasn't a child's birthday. Like it was somehow her show. She leaned across the table, hair brushing the frosting, and blew out every flame before my son even had a chance to lean in. Then she laughed and tapped her chest. See, Grandma still got lungs. They cheered. He sat frozen, his hands on his lap. I thought the evening would be warm. I had pictured a simple family gathering, laughter echoing through the house, kids running in socks across the wooden floor. I imagined my son closing his eyes over the candles, whispering some secret wish about dinosaurs or video games. Instead, reality was the air filled with smoke and everyone applauding her. I wanted to slam the knife down and say, "It's not your cake." I wanted to shout, "This is his day, not yours." But I didn't. I smiled like the rest of them, though my smile was tight, almost painful. Inside, my stomach knotted. My son's eyes found mine. He looked for permission to be sad. I gave him a little nod, the kind that said, "I see you. Hold on, we'll make this right." Because this wasn't new. 2 years ago at Christmas, she handed out gifts to everyone. Pajamas for her daughters, a leather wallet for her husband, toys for all the grandkids. For me? Nothing. She didn't even pretend she had forgotten. She just moved on. When I asked later if maybe there had been a mix-up, she said, "You're family now. You don't need a gift." Last Thanksgiving, she lined everyone up for a family photo. I was holding my toddler daughter when she waved me aside. "Just the real family," she said. I stepped back, cheeks burning, pretending to adjust my daughter's sweater while they smiled at the camera. So when she blew out those candles, it wasn't just fire she snuffed out. It was years of being erased piece by piece. The air in the living room smelled of sugar, smoke, and wine. My sister-in-law sliced her fork through the cake, oblivious. My husband chuckled, "That's Mom for you." He didn't see the way our son's lips pressed together until they disappeared. He didn't notice the way his little shoulders slumped like he'd lost something he couldn't name. I served cake anyway. My hands steady, my voice light, my smile polite. She clinked glasses with my husband and announced, "It's tradition. Grandmothers bring the luck." My jaw clenched so tight, my teeth ached. Tradition? Since when did tradition mean humiliating a child on his birthday? The chatter grew louder. The kids darted between chairs. She laughed again, satisfied. I excused myself quietly, slipped into the hallway, and opened the closet. Inside sat a small white box I had hidden the night before. A second cake. A simple one from the bakery, chocolate with rainbow sprinkles. I told myself it was backup in case my homemade one collapsed, but really it was something else. Insurance. I carried the box to the stairs, where my son sat with his plate untouched. His eyes were on the floor. I set the box on his lap. His head shot up, eyes wide. "For me? For you," I said. 7 candles. Only yours. We lit them together. Just us in the quiet hallway. The flames glowed softly against the walls. He closed his eyes and breathed deep. His cheeks puffed, and the candles flickered out, smoke curling upward. He smiled then. A real smile, and I realized something. She thought she had won. She thought by stepping into every spotlight she could keep control. But in that moment, she lost something she didn't even notice. She lost his trust. His joy. The magic of a wish. I hugged him, kissed the top of his head, and carried the empty box back to the closet. When we rejoined the party, she was still laughing, still telling her stories, still basking in attention. She never looked at him long enough to see that his smile had already returned, not because of her, but in spite of her. She thought she had stolen his birthday. She didn't realize she had only stolen the version of it inside her own head. I don't know if she will ever understand, but I do know this. Next year, I'll be ready again, and so will he. I had pictured this birthday 100 times before it happened. In my head, it was simple, sweet, even a little chaotic in the best way. The living room would smell like vanilla and balloons. Kids would run around chasing each other, while adults clapped along to the birthday song. My son would sit proudly at the table, eyes wide, waiting for the moment the candles were lit. Then he would close his eyes, whisper his wish, and blow them out himself. That was the picture I held onto. It was the thing that kept me awake the night before as I balanced layers of cake on the counter, frosting sliding slightly to the side while I tried to smooth it out with a spatula. I told myself, it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be his. I had even planned the smallest details. I taped streamers along the walls, blue and silver, because those were his favorite colors. I tied balloons to the chairs, one of them shaped like a dinosaur because he had been obsessed with them since preschool. I set out paper plates with little rockets printed on them. None of it was expensive, but every piece mattered to me. It was my way of telling him, you are celebrated. You are loved. The morning of the party, he woke up before me. He tiptoed into the kitchen, wearing his dinosaur pajamas, rubbing his eyes, and asked, "Do I get cake today?" I laughed. "You get cake, gifts, and 7 candles." He grinned like the world had just handed him a treasure chest. I should have known better than to expect peace. When my mother-in-law arrived, she walked in like she was the host. She carried a bottle of wine in one hand and criticism in the other. She glanced around at the streamers and said, "Oh, so simple. When my kids were young, we always rented a hall. Real parties need space." I smiled, nodded, and kept arranging cups on the table. My husband laughed it off as, just mom's way, but I noticed my son's eyes flicker. He had been proud of those streamers. He helped me tape them up. He looked down at his socks, and I wanted to scoop him up and shield him from every dismissive word she had ever said. As guests filled the living room, I tried to ignore the tension. I focused on details, refilled bowls with chips, checked the frosting again, lit the candles carefully, making sure each one stood upright. I even whispered to my son, "Make your wish count. 7 is special." He nodded, eyes sparkling. That was the moment I thought everything was lining up. The kids gathered around the table. Someone dimmed the lights. We sang the song, off-key but happy. My son leaned forward slightly, his lips parting as the final note faded. It was his second of magic. And then she did it. She leaned in, fast, breath strong, and blew out every candle before his mouth even moved. Her perfume mixed with the smell of melted wax. The smoke rose like a curtain. My son's face froze. His wish dissolved into nothing. The room erupted with laughter, clapping like she had done something adorable. She patted her chest and joked, "See? Grandma's still got lungs." She turned it into her performance. My husband laughed nervously. My sister-in-law clapped harder. Even the kids giggled, because they didn't know what else to do. But my son didn't laugh. His shoulders sank. His eyes dropped to the frosting. He slid his small hands into his lap. His lips pressed so tightly they turned pale. He was too young to put words to it, but I saw it clearly. He felt invisible. The cake knife grew heavy in my hand. I forced a smile, cut slices, and placed them on plates. Everyone else ate as if nothing had gone wrong. She sipped her wine and declared, "It's tradition. Grandmothers bring the luck." My jaw ached from clenching, but I stayed silent. Inside me, disappointment curdled into something heavier. I thought about the hours I spent baking, the money I saved from extra shifts just to buy balloons and plates, the way he had looked at me that morning, so sure this was his day. And in one breath, she stole it. I kept replaying the picture I had built in my mind, the candles glowing against his face, his eyes squeezed shut, his cheeks puffed as he blew them out. Everyone cheering for him, not for her. That picture never happened. It lived only in my imagination now, replaced by the reality of smoke and laughter that didn't belong to him. I carried the weight of it through the rest of the evening. Every giggle from her was a reminder. Every bite of cake tasted flat, like cardboard. The decorations I had taped with care looked cheap under her shadow. The more I replayed it, the clearer it became. This wasn't just a ruined moment, it was a pattern. It was Christmas with no gift for me. Thanksgiving with no place for me in the photo. And now it was my son's birthday with no candles for him. By the time the plates were cleared, I wasn't angry anymore. Anger is hot and fast. What I felt was slower, heavier, like stone. And under that weight, a quiet decision formed. I would not let her define his memory of this birthday. I slipped into the hallway, opened the closet, and pulled out the little white box. Inside was the backup cake, the one I had hidden just in case. Chocolate, sprinkles, small but ours. I carried it to the stairs, where he sat alone, plate untouched. When I placed the box on his lap, his eyes widened. "For me? For you," I whispered. 7 candles. Only yours. And in that moment, reality shifted. The picture I had dreamed of finally happened, not in front of the crowd, but in the quiet hallway. Just him, just me, 7 tiny flames, and a wish no one could steal. People always assume tension between a daughter-in-law and a mother-in-law comes from something small. They picture squabbles over recipes or arguments about laundry. They imagine sitcom bickering, exaggerated for laughs. What they never see is the accumulation, the slow drip of tiny cuts that eventually bleed into something bigger. This birthday wasn't the beginning. It was only the latest chapter. When I married my husband, I believed things would smooth out. His mother was polite during the engagement. She smiled in photos, complimented the ring, even offered to host a dinner. I thought maybe the rough edges I had noticed before were just nerves, the kind of stiffness people feel when families merge. I wanted to believe the best. I always wanted to believe the best. But the first sign came the week after the wedding. We returned from our honeymoon, tired but happy, and she was waiting in our apartment. She had let herself in with the spare key we'd given her for emergencies. The fridge was rearranged, my clothes folded differently, and the note she left on the counter said, "You'll thank me later." This place needed a woman's touch. I remember standing there in my own kitchen, suitcase still in my hand, feeling like a guest. Then came Thanksgiving. Everyone was gathered around the long wooden table. My husband carved the turkey while she orchestrated everything, directing who sat where, who poured drinks, who led grace. When it came time for the family photo, she lined everyone up in front of the fireplace. I stepped into the frame holding my daughter, and she waved me aside without hesitation. "Just the real family," she said. My husband frowned but said nothing. The camera clicked, and I stood off to the side pretending to fix a bow in my daughter's hair while my chest burned. Christmas that year followed the same script. Wrapped boxes were stacked high under the tree. She passed gifts out one by one, each with a flourish. My sister-in-law unwrapped a designer scarf. Her husband got a watch. Even the cousins had personalized mugs. When it came to me, there was nothing. Not even the courtesy of pretending. I smiled anyway, cheeks stiff, and she shrugged. "You're family now. You don't need presents to know that." The room laughed like it was a joke. My husband squeezed my knee under the table, as if that made it better. Each incident alone might seem trivial. A missing gift. A photo without me. An apartment rearranged. But together, they stacked, one on top of another, until the weight pressed down. I tried to shrug it off. I told myself not to take it personally. But deep down, I knew what it was. She didn't see me as part of her family. Not really. The cruel part was how subtle it often looked to outsiders. To them, she was charming. She baked pies, told stories, hugged people at church. They never saw the way she leaned across a dinner table to correct me, or how she pretended not to hear me when I spoke. They didn't notice how she used the word them when talking about my children, never ours. Over time, my body learned to anticipate it. Before every family gathering, my chest would tighten. I would rehearse neutral smiles in the mirror, practice responses that sounded polite but not weak. I became fluent in silence. Sometimes silence was safer than confrontation, but silence doesn't erase memory. Like the afternoon she criticized the way I dressed my daughter. Too flashy, she said, tugging at the hem of the dress I had bought with extra shifts at work. Or the evening she told my husband in front of me, "You've lost weight since marrying her. I'm glad someone's feeding you properly again." Everyone laughed, except me. And then there was the baby shower for my sister-in-law. She organized everything down to the color of the napkins. I showed up with a handmade blanket I had spent weeks crocheting. She accepted it, smiled tightly, and then placed it on the gift table without a word. Later, I overheard her telling someone, "She tries, bless her heart." That phrase carried more poison than outright insults. The pattern was clear. In her eyes, I was temporary. A placeholder. Someone attached to her son, but never really part of the circle. She reinforced it at every opportunity, sometimes with humor, sometimes with a shrug, always with enough ambiguity to deny if I ever confronted her. By the time the birthday came, I had a library of these moments stored inside me. Little files labeled with dates, smells, and sounds. The clink of glasses at Thanksgiving. The rustle of wrapping paper at Christmas. The smell of pie cooling on her counter while I sat empty-handed. Each memory sharp, each one proof. So when she leaned forward and blew out my son's candles, it didn't just feel like a party trick. It felt like confirmation. Proof that she would always find a way to remind me, and now remind him, that we were less. That our moments were hers to take. What cut deepest wasn't just the act. It was the audience. The clapping. The laughter. The way my husband chuckled and said, "That's mom for you." They all accepted it, normalizing the theft of a child's wish as if it were nothing. I sat there, knife in hand, knowing that if I protested, I'd be the one accused of spoiling the mood. This is how it works, you see. The offender acts, everyone laughs, and the victim stays silent to keep the peace. The silence becomes complicity. And then the cycle repeats. But I couldn't unsee my son's face. The way he shrank into himself. The way his shoulders drooped. It was like watching the pattern transfer to him. First it was me erased from the frame, then him erased from his own birthday. If I stayed silent, I wasn't just protecting peace. I was teaching him that his joy could be stolen without consequence. That was the thought that hardened inside me as the party continued. I knew then that silence had already cost too much. This wasn't just about a cake. It never was. The candles had been blown out, the laughter had died down, and plates of cake were being passed around, like nothing unusual had happened. But inside me, something had cracked open. I sat there, with the knife still in my hand, listening to forks scrape against plates, and I knew I couldn't just let it go. Not this time. I had swallowed too many small humiliations. But watching my son's face, seeing his joy vanish in the smoke of candles that weren't his to extinguish, something shifted. My mother-in-law was in her element, retelling the moment like it was a funny anecdote. "He was too slow," she said, laughing. "So Grandma had to help." She raised her glass, waiting for others to join in. They did. My husband smiled sheepishly and clinked his cup against hers. To them, it was harmless, even charming. To me, it was theft in plain sight. The room was warm, too warm. The air smelled of sugar and cheap wine. My skin prickled. I glanced at my son. He was pushing cake crumbs around his plate with his fork, shoulders hunched, lips pressed shut. He looked small, smaller than 7. And that was the moment I decided. I put the knife down gently, stood, and excused myself. Nobody noticed. Why would they? They were laughing too loudly, too absorbed in her story. I walked into the hallway, opened the closet, and reached for the little white box I had hidden there. The weight of it in my hands steadied me. When I returned to the stairs, my son was sitting alone. The other children had run off to play, leaving him behind. He looked up when he saw me, his eyes still damp, his fork untouched. I sat beside him, placed the box on his lap, and whispered, "This one is just for you." He blinked, confused, then slowly lifted the lid. Inside was the smaller cake, chocolate frosting, rainbow sprinkles. His mouth parted in surprise. "For me?" he asked, voice so soft I barely heard it. "For you," I repeated. 7 candles, only yours. I lit them one by one, shielding the tiny flames with my hand. The hallway light flickered above us, but in that small corner, The glow of candles made its own world. I leaned close and whispered, "Make a wish. Take your time." He closed his eyes, scrunched his face, and for a few seconds the world held still. I watched his lashes tremble, his small hands curled into fists. Then he drew a deep breath and blew. The flames went out in a soft wave, smoke curling upward. His smile returned, wide and true, brighter than any light in that house. We sat there for a moment, just breathing in the faint smell of melted wax. He laughed quietly, the kind of laugh that comes from relief. "I wished," he said. "I know," I answered. "And this time it was yours." That was my action, my retaliation. Not loud, not dramatic, but powerful. I hadn't shouted across the table. I hadn't embarrassed anyone in front of their wine glasses. Instead, I carved out a space where his voice mattered, where his moment belonged only to him. When we returned to the living room, the party was still going on, as if nothing had happened. My mother-in-law was sipping wine, cheeks flushed, recounting her story again. She didn't notice the way my son's step was lighter, the way his eyes gleamed. She didn't see that he had already had his real birthday in the hallway, away from her stage. I moved quietly through the room, serving more drinks, clearing plates, playing the part of hostess. No one suspected what had happened in the hallway. To them, I was still silent, still agreeable. That suited me fine. Let them believe. Because I knew the truth. The real birthday had been salvaged. She thought she had stolen his moment, but she hadn't. She had only stolen it from herself. Later, when the guests had gone and the house was quiet, I tucked him into bed. He clutched one of his new toys, already half asleep, and whispered, "Thanks for the second cake, Mom." I kissed his forehead and whispered back, "There will always be a cake for you." Downstairs, my husband asked why I had disappeared during the party. I told him I had to grab something from the closet. He didn't press. Maybe he didn't want to know. Or maybe he sensed the line that had been crossed, but didn't have the courage to face it. I sat at the kitchen table, after everyone was asleep, the smell of frosting still clinging to my hands, and thought about how small victories can feel enormous. I hadn't exposed her. I hadn't demanded justice. But I had given my son back something she tried to take. That was the turning point. The moment I understood that retaliation doesn't always have to be fire. Sometimes it's a whisper, a secret, a candle lit in a quiet hallway. And sometimes, that is enough to shift the story. The next day, she called to gloat. "Such a lovely party," she said. "Did you see how everyone laughed? It's important for children to learn they're part of something bigger." I let her talk. I murmured polite responses. But inside, I smiled. She thought she had been the center of the story. She had no idea the real story had unfolded without her. I didn't correct her. I didn't need to, because deep down, I knew she had lost something she didn't even realize. And one day, maybe she would. When we re-entered the living room, no one suspected anything. To them, I had simply stepped out for a moment. My mother-in-law was still in command of the party, laughing loudly, retelling the candle story as if it were a comedy routine. She leaned back in her chair, glass of wine in hand, cheeks glowing with self-satisfaction. "She was too slow," she said again, pointing at my son like he had been the punchline of a joke. Grandma had to step in. The people around her chuckled politely. My husband gave a sheepish grin, the kind that said he didn't want to challenge her. I moved through the room quietly, gathering empty cups, offering more chips, making small talk. On the outside, I looked like the accommodating daughter-in-law she had always wanted me to be. But inside, I held a secret. My son had blown out his own candles. He had made his own wish. He had smiled again. And no amount of her storytelling could erase that. He ran off with the other children after eating his slice of cake, lighter now, as if a weight had lifted. He didn't mention the hallway cake to anyone. It was ours, private and untouched by her shadow. That secrecy made it even more precious. Every time she raised her glass, I reminded myself that her victory was hollow. She believed she had stolen the night. She had no idea she had been cut out of its heart. When the last guest left, the living room looked like a storm had passed through. Paper plates stacked on the coffee table, frosting smeared across napkins, balloons sagging toward the floor. My husband kissed my cheek and said, "It was a good party, wasn't it?" I only smiled. He didn't notice the tension in my shoulders or the fact that I hadn't eaten a single bite of cake. He didn't ask why our son looked happier after I'd returned from the hallway. He wanted peace, not truth. And maybe, for that night, I wanted the same. Later, after the children were in bed, I washed dishes in the quiet kitchen. The sound of water hitting porcelain filled the silence. My husband scrolled through his phone, laughing at a text from his sister. When he finally looked up, he said, "Mom was just being mom. Don't take it too hard." I dried my hands on a towel and nodded. I didn't explain what had happened in the hallway. That moment wasn't for him. It wasn't for anyone but my son. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a message from my mother-in-law. "Lovely party last night. Everyone laughed so much. See? Memories are what matter, not who blows the candles." I stared at the words, my lips curling into a thin smile. She truly believed she had created the memory that would last. She didn't know that the memory my son carried was one of smoke curling in a quiet hallway, his mother by his side, 7 candles just for him. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I walked into the kitchen where my son was eating cereal, hair messy, still in pajamas. He looked up at me and grinned. "That second cake was better anyway," he whispered, as if it were our secret code. My chest warmed. That was the only review that mattered. All day, I watched him replay his birthday in his own way. He stacked his toys in little towers, retold the parts he enjoyed, skipped over the candle moment entirely. He didn't give her the satisfaction of being in his story. Children are honest like that. They keep what shines and quietly discard what hurts. Meanwhile, she called my husband, her voice bubbling through the speaker. "What a wonderful night," she said. "Did you see how everyone laughed? It's important that children learn humility. He'll remember it." I stood in the kitchen doorway, drying dishes again, listening to her redefine cruelty as a lesson. My husband nodded along, unwilling to argue. He wanted peace. But I wanted something else. Not revenge. Not drama. Just truth. And I knew the truth was on my side. Because when I tucked my son into bed that evening, he whispered, "Next year, can we have our cake first, before Grandma comes?" He didn't say it with bitterness, just with quiet wisdom. 7 years old, and he already understood something about boundaries that most adults never learn. I brushed his hair back and said, "Yes, next year, we'll do it our way." That was the consequence she didn't see. Piece by piece, she was cutting herself out of his memories. She thought she was teaching him humility, but what he learned instead was distance. What she saw as a joke, he felt as betrayal. And betrayal sticks. I didn't need to lecture her. I didn't need to confront her in front of everyone. Her actions spoke louder than my silence ever could. The space between her and my son was growing, not because I pushed him away from her, but because she pushed herself away from him. The following week, she posted photos online. The group picture of the family, the cake with smoke rising, captions about tradition and love. People commented, "Beautiful family," and she soaked it in. But the best part was knowing that behind every glossy image, the truth was different. The truth was 7 candles lit in a hallway. A boy making a wish. A smile that returned. That truth belonged to us. And while she kept performing for an audience, she never noticed she had already lost the only person who mattered that night. A week after the party, the house had returned to normal. Balloons sagged in corners until they finally gave up and floated to the carpet. Stray pieces of confetti clung stubbornly to the couch. The leftover frosting hardened in the fridge, waiting to be scraped into the trash. But the memory lingered, sharper than any decoration left behind. My son had already moved on in the way children do. He played with his new toys, wore his dinosaur t-shirt proudly, and mentioned his hallway wish only to me. To him, the story had been rewritten. It wasn't about disappointment anymore. It was about a secret moment with his mom, 7 candles, and a wish no one could steal. But for me, the story kept unfolding in my mind. Every time I replayed the scene, I noticed something new. The way her hair had brushed against the frosting when she leaned in. The way my husband chuckled without meeting my eyes. The way the applause drowned out the silence of a boy who should have been celebrated. And beneath all of it, the question, why? Why did she feel the need to center herself in every moment? Why was my presence so unbearable that she had to erase it piece by piece, even when it came to her own grandson's birthday? Maybe it wasn't about me at all. Maybe it was about control. About reminding herself and everyone else that she was the axis of the family, the one around whom everything spun. But the truth was different. The truth was, she was losing ground without even realizing it, because the more she tried to dominate, the more distance she created. Not just with me, but with the very people she wanted to claim. My son may not have words for it yet, but he felt it. Children always do. They know when laughter isn't safe. They know when love comes with conditions. I thought about the years ahead. More birthdays, more holidays, more chances for her to insert herself at the center, and I thought about how I would handle them. Not by shouting across crowded rooms. Not by arguing pointlessly with someone who would never admit fault, but by carving out spaces she couldn't reach. Quiet victories, secret candles, moments that belong to us. Sometimes retaliation isn't a spectacle. Sometimes it's the absence of one. A few days later, she came over unannounced, as she often did. She sat at my kitchen table, sipping coffee like it was her throne, and said, "He'll remember that night forever. Family traditions stick." I stirred sugar into my mug and smiled. She thought she had created a legacy. She had no idea she had written herself out of it. She looked around my kitchen, critiquing as usual. "These cabinets need painting, and you should really think about better curtains." I nodded, letting her voice wash over me like static. Her words didn't sting the way they used to, because in my mind, I could still see the hallway, the glow of candles, the smile on my son's face. That was the real legacy. That night, when I tucked him into bed, he asked again, "Can we always do it our way?" His eyes were heavy with sleep, his voice soft but steady. "Yes," I promised. "Always," and I meant it. The ending of this story isn't loud. There were no slammed doors, no shouted confrontations, no dramatic walkouts. But sometimes, the quiet endings are the most powerful, because they leave space for reflection. Did she realize what she had lost? Did she notice that her grandson's memory no longer included her? I don't know. Maybe she still tells the story of that night, laughing about how she blew out the candles. Maybe she thinks it makes her charming. But charm is cheap. Trust is not. And trust is gone. The next birthday will come. There will be cake again, and candles again, and family again. She might try to take the moment again. But this time, I'll be ready. My son will be ready. Because once you've seen someone reveal who they truly are, you can't unsee it. The hallway cake taught me that I don't have to fight her battles on her terms. I don't need to scream to prove I was right. I just need to make sure my children know the truth. That their wishes matter. That their voices count. That no one, not even family, gets to take that away. So maybe she'll keep telling her version of the story. Maybe people will laugh along. That's fine. Let her have the audience. I already have the memory, and that memory is stronger than applause. As I sat alone in the quiet kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence, I let the thought settle. This wasn't just about a birthday. It was about every small dismissal, every erasure, every time I was told I didn't belong. And it was about choosing, finally, not to let her define the story. I don't know if she will ever realize the moment she lost something she can't get back, but I know this. My son does.